Alex is joining us. He is the CISO of Facebook, the CSO. He is the former CISO of Yahoo. He is one of the founders of ISEC Partners and spent many years there. As he described, this is a great group of people. He is deeply technical in his security expertise and also has that vision looking forward. He's got a lot of great thoughts for us. Without that, let's just get this started. Alex Stamos.
Hey everybody, how you guys doing? Yeah, that's not super excited, but okay, cool, thanks. Great to be back at OWASP. It's nice to be among my people. When you start working at big companies, you have to mingle with all kinds of people, including non-nerds, and trust me, it's very difficult to deal with those folks. This is my second time in OWASP in about a year. The last time I spoke at an OWASP event was AppSec Cali, which I strongly recommend. Yeah, let's hear it for AppSec California. I strongly recommend. It's a great event, and I strongly recommend you go try it out. Not just a great content, but a beautiful location and really nice people running it. And when I was there, I got to talk a little bit about what I've learned working for web scale companies about the challenges of how we have to apply security, and particularly application security at scale problems from a technical perspective, right? So we talked a little bit about how companies like ours don't have the ability really to buy anything off the shelf that works at our scale, how the problems we have are very different from the problems other folks have, and how we need, as an industry, to kind of move towards ideas such as non-real-time and delayed security gratification, so to speak, where we're not building products like we've always built them for the last 20 years. Today, we're gonna have a little bit different. I wanna talk more about how security needs to scale up in a different way, how we need to expand our ability to deal with the problems of the modern internet. And it turns out the modern internet is not what you think it is, right? So there's something like 2.8 to 3 billion people with internet access. That's roughly only about 40% of the people on this planet, right, have internet access. So we still have a significant number of people who have yet to have the benefits that we all get, including the ability to settle any bar bet within 30 seconds. The modern internet is not 2.8 billion $3,000 MacBook Pros and people with $600 top-of-the-line Android smartphones. The modern internet is a much more complicated and much more difficult place to operate than I think most of us realize, of people who live in the Western developed world and who work in technology. I see a lot of those glowing Apple logos already, and that's not what you're generally dealing with. You're not. When you want to deal with people who are being connected to the internet these days, there's a lot of facts that make it much more difficult to keep them safe. The median new internet user is not living in a developed country. They're living in a developing country, in a place that's undergoing probably rapid economic and cultural change. They're using a low-cost mobile device to connect to a wireless network. So they will possibly spend the rest of their lives only connected to the internet over wireless networks and will never be plugged into anything. And by a low-cost device, I mean something like a $50, $60 phone that is considered a smartphone in that case, but you guys would not recognize it as a smartphone. It has a physical layout that does not look normal to you, and is possibly running a pretty old version of a mobile OS that can't be patched. The median new internet user does not speak or read or write any English at all. And if they know any, it's a very minimal amount. And they have no experience in the PC paradigm. So when we add somebody to the internet today, you're adding somebody who has never had the experience that we all had of first accessing the internet on a big screen with a keyboard and with all of the metaphors we've been using as an industry since basically the 70s about how users authenticate themselves and what your identity is online and how all that stuff works. And so with this challenge of these people, we need to adapt. We can't continue to do security overall and AppSec specifically and still keep these people safe on the modern internet. So I'm gonna talk about 6 kind of general suggestions of things that I think we should be thinking about as an industry to do better and to serve these people better. The first, we need to start using the word safety more, right? So we all like being part of the security industry, and that sounds like more fun than being in the safety industry. But the problem with security is it implies a couple of things. There's a couple of ideas built into us talking about security that I think are actually pretty poisonous in the modern world. One is security kind of implies something is safe when used properly, right? safety implies something is safe when used in the real world, and that people are safe in the real world. So, for example, the security of a car is if somebody locks the car and puts the alarm on, the alarm should keep somebody from stealing it, right? Car manufacturers don't get in trouble for if I leave the car unlocked and I leave the keys in the ignition, somebody driving away, and that's totally reasonable. But they also have an idea of safety, which is in all of the reasonable things that might happen to this device that they sell, a device that might be misused, including, a car should not be driven at 50 miles per hour into a stationary brick wall. But that's something they have to plan for, and that's something that happens every day. And it's very important when you build things like that to make sure people are safe, even if the product is misused or it's used in a way that you never expected possible. And that's one of the problems with AppSec is we only focus on security, and we very rarely focus on safety. And the result is we build things that are safe for us and for the immediate people we know, because we know how to use it correctly, and we've got fully patched devices, and we understand all the ways things can fail. And that's very different than building something that works in the real world. There's another problem about that I really kind of dislike about Silicon Valley overall, but it really affects security, is we're doing a lot of designing for ourselves and at the longest reach for our parents. Who here has ever said, it's so easy that my dad or my mom can use it? Come on, you go ahead. Yes, right? That's like a common kind of thought process of like, okay, great. First I'm gonna build this so I can use it and my friends, and now I'm gonna make it so easy so my parents can use it. That is not an appropriate measure, right? My parents are not reflective of the median new internet user. They're not reflective of the 60% of humanity to whom we have yet to bring the benefits of connectivity to. They obviously speak English. They've grown up in a different world. They have PC experience. And we can't use this idea of like finding the person who's in my social circle who has the least computer knowledge and using that as our target. The other problem is that kind of, there's a little bit of an insult there. One, you should be nice to your parents, and you shouldn't use them in negative metaphors when designing products. But also there's a bit of an assumption there that this is about kind of intelligence or skill, and it's not. The problem that we're facing is not that. It's about culture and language and experience with the metaphors that we use, metaphors like the username and password combo, which come out of timeshare mainframes in the 70s. It's a lack of experience in those things and a lack of experience in kind of the standard cultural touchstones that are very hard for us to explain what they are, but they're deeply embedded in us. The lack of experience of that is what causes people not to be safe online. And that's a real problem. Second thing we need to do is we need to really focus on real versus potential harm. So in the security world, we love to think about theoretical worst possible outcomes and then to build entire narratives around that, right? The traditional app security lifecycle is based upon what? Finding what? What word with V? Vulnerabilities, yeah, okay. Come on, you guys warm up here, okay? If I'm gonna go Socratic, you guys are gonna have to really help me out here, okay? Is based upon the vulnerability lifecycle. The idea that somebody does research into a new kind of bug that has never existed before. That research is published. People come up with side publications on like, ooh, that's interesting. Here's another way it can be exploited, or here's another way to find it. And now you have a whole bunch of products that people thought were safe all of a sudden turn out not to be safe, right? So for those of you old enough, you can remember kind of the seminal papers from Jeremiah Grossman and such around cross-site request forgery, which nobody knew existed, and then all of a sudden every single web app in the world had a bug, right? And so you have this, now you have a round of people finding bugs and doing something with it, publicizing them, putting DEF CON talks together, reporting them via bug bounty programs in the modern world. And then people go and patch those and fix them. And that keeps on happening until there's more research into a new kind of bug. Now, the problem with this is you're measuring, you're looking for bugs, and we need to find bugs, and we need to prevent bugs, and that's good. But what a bug is it represents a potential for bad things to happen. And it's important to fix those things, but the current AppSec world, we're obsessed with these things, and we're only thinking about what the possible potential bad things are and not around what's really happening in the real world. If we were gonna have like a safety life cycle instead of a security life cycle, a safety life cycle would be that we need to first come up with measurements of bad things that happen to people in the real world. We need to develop mitigations for those measurements, for those bad things, and then we need to test those measurements in the real world to see if we've effectively driven down the bad thing, right? And so what are some of the like quantitative measurements that you can measure that you can drive down? So some of the things we think about at Facebook are things like the account takeover rate. How many people are having their accounts taken over on a daily basis? None of these takeovers are our fault from a traditional security model, right? If somebody has their password stolen because they used it on Ashley Madison, it happens to be the same as their Facebook password, that's not like in a security model, something that we're even supposed to care about. But in the safety model, if actual people are getting harmed, and we can measure that, then that is something we have to care about and something we have to mitigate. The spam malware volume, the number of times people try to sell something or move malware across somebody's platform, fraudulent transactions, these are all things that we can measure, and then we can come up with mitigations and drive those measurements down, down, down. And there's a couple of things that you need to be able to do this. One, you need the ability to bucket test and to move very quickly. So it turns out the rest of the tech world of the modern, especially web and mobile world, is getting pretty good at this. There are a lot of techniques that we have that allow us to A/B test, to bucket test, to very quickly do something for 1% of the population and then pull it back if something bad happened. So I do recommend that you go and you talk to the people at your companies who work on that kind of stuff and have a good relationship with them, because we have found it at Facebook to be very helpful for security people to be able to go to the mobile folks and say, we want to test a security feature for 10,000 people, and we want to watch very closely what happens, and we want to revoke it if we see something bad happening. And all of the technologies are there because people do that all the time for user experience and new features and stuff like that. There's another kind of part of this that's important, and that part is that you have to be willing to take crap from people who are thinking about security and not thinking about safety, right? So I talked about usernames and passwords. I think it's pretty well understood that the existence of a password on any website is a bad thing, right? Just the existence of passwords as a metaphor is hurting normal people. It is a failed way of authenticating people across the internet. And anybody who works at a big company understands that, because what you see are hundreds of millions of credentials getting dumped out every year and then used to harm people and cause them, in some cases, actual pretty serious harm. And so we need to do better, but it's not easy to do so. And in the security world, a username password thing is kind of like, using usernames and passwords is kind of like, you don't get fired for buying IBM in the 60s, right? Like, nobody gets fired for using username and password on their website. It's the generally accepted thing. We understand the security model. We understand the ways it fails. And you don't get blamed for continuing to fail in the way everybody else has failed for the last 20 years. What you do get blamed for is potential bad things that happen. Maybe they don't even happen in the real world, but potential bad things when you try to innovate. So at my last employer, we did an experiment where we thought, we have all these people using passwords to log in to our site, and they also have a mobile number with us. And if somebody steals the password, they can get in. And if somebody steals the mobile number, they can reset the password and they can still get in, right? So there's 2 keys on the front door and there's 1 key on the back door. What would happen if we get rid of one of the keys on the front door, right? That should actually keep people safer. And so we rolled out a mechanism by which people could log in just by giving us a mobile number. And every time you added a new browser or added a new mobile device to your account, you would be texted a one-time password and you'd log in. And there was a big difference between how people in the security world saw this and the reality of how it affected people. In the security world, there was a decent amount of press giving us a lot of crap for the theoretical bad things that could happen getting rid of passwords, of like, somebody can get their mobile number stolen, or what if somebody's phone is stolen, or what if if you were able to socially engineer the phone network to give your phone number to somebody else. In all those cases, now you can log in unfettered. And the truth is that's kind of true, right? But there is a lot of people giving us crap. One of the persons who did the most of that was the CEO of a password management company, right? Which kind of makes sense. He's kind of built in both economically and personally into the password paradigm. And he said a lot of stuff about that. But the truth is, we went and we measured, and among the hundreds of thousands of people that tried out this beta feature, there wasn't a single example of account takeover. Whereas at any big site, you have tens of thousands of accounts take over per day because of passwords being stolen from third parties and from malware, right? So, to innovate like that, you have to be willing to take the slings and arrows from people who are only thinking about the potential harm and aren't thinking about the real harm. And then you have to be willing and able to drive the organization to resist those slings and arrows while you actually help people out. And then the important part is to publish that data later so other people can learn and that we can slowly change the kind of conventional wisdom. The ironic postscript to that is that the gentleman who criticized us the most publicly, 3 months later, his company got broken into and all the password hashes stolen, which I think was a pretty good demonstration of the reasons why you don't want those things hanging around. The third thing that we need to start to do better as an industry is we need to accept non-optimal solutions and non-optimal situations, right? So in the security world, we like things to be perfect. We like to have solutions where you can say, it is inconceivable for somebody to do something bad in this case. We don't like solutions where it's like, well, if the person's good enough, they can get by this. And like kind of the classical example of this is in cryptographic algorithms where nobody really feels comfortable having a cryptographic algorithm where there is an adversary out there that can brute force it, right? Like, you know, that just feels wrong to us and we want to drive that out. And I think that's fine. I think that's, you know, the normal progress of things is as computational power gets stronger, we're going to have to throw away old cryptographic algorithms. We're going to have to increase key sizes, increase complexity, move on to new things. But the result of this, when we're not willing to accept a non-optimal solution, we could end up having knock-on effects that actually cause way more harm than otherwise. So the best example of this is something that's going on right now that I think is actually going to harm a lot of people, which is the SHA-1 to SHA-256 transition. Who's heard of the SHA-256 stuff? Yeah, it's you should have heard of it, and if you haven't, you need to look it up because it is going to impact your company. So the CA Browser Forum is the organization of the browsers and the certificate authorities that set standards for certificates, which I think is great because before it existed, there was all kinds of craziness where people did all kinds of bad stuff. And things are a lot better now that the CAB exists. SHA-1 is the standard way that most certificates on the internet are now signed after we got rid of MD5. And there's a lot of research that shows that we are getting to a point where a SHA-1 collision is actually within reach of a reasonably financed adversary. Probably today, it's possibly within reach of like a government or perhaps somebody like us. Soon it will be in reach of much more people, although there's yet to be an example where somebody generated a SHA-1 collision and got a cert for somebody else and then showed it, but it's quite possible it's happened in private. And so the CA Browser Forum said, well, this is not good, we got to drive to SHA-256, which I think is the correct impulse. But the result is what they did is they set hard deadlines that for every single certificate in the world. So after December 31st of this year, you cannot get a new SHA-1 certificate. So if you want to, next year, turn on a new site, you can only get SHA-256. In fact, I strongly recommend you go back to your companies and have a plan to stockpile SHA-1 certificates in December of 3 years of length, and that gives you a little bit of time up to December 2018. But the result of this is people who have devices that can't handle SHA-256 don't have any option, right? They just actually don't get HTTPS. And you might think, well, that's only a couple of people. It turns out from some of the stats that we've gathered that something around 5% of the people on the planet don't have access to a device that has SHA-256 support, right? And if you look at some developing countries, that number comes to 20 to 30%. And I don't think that's an acceptable loss. I don't think it's an acceptable loss in this situation because it turns out there are mechanisms you can use where you can support the better technology, SHA-256, while still having the backup technology running side by side. And when somebody connects to your site, you intelligently serve up the technology that they can handle. And so what I would prefer in situations like this, instead of us saying we're going to cut off 30% of a developing country from the ability to have any kind of TLS, that we instead come up with a mechanism where we can have things like legacy certificates that are known not to work with modern Chrome or modern Firefox, and that we're okay with that, and that we still have standards that allow us to have backup systems that can work for people in the developing world. Because the truth is, what's going to happen is you're not going to all of a sudden see 1 billion people run out and buy new $600 phones at the AT&T store, right? That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is they're just not going to be able to get to HTTPS all of a sudden. And if you're a service provider in one of these countries, are you going to cut off 20 to 30% of your customer base? No. What you're going to do is you're going to offer your services over HTTP. So for the benefit of modern browser users, of people on like the dev version of Chrome, we've made them safer a bit from a theoretical attack in SHA-1 to a real attack to SHA-56. And we got rid of that small little possible vulnerability. And in reality, people in the developing world, we've taken them from not perfect crypto to no crypto at all, which turns out to be a massive downgrade of their personal security. So situations like this, I think just as an industry, we got to do better of if there are multiple situations and you have the optimal situation and the non-optimal situation living side by side, we have to be okay with the non-optimal situation existing. And the metaphor I'd use here is we need to be careful not to, people talk about the long tail a lot, of like the long tail of XP, SP2 machines that can't do X or Y. And instead of saying the long tail of XP machines or the long tail of Android 2.3, realize that that long tail is not the computers, it's the human beings sitting behind them who are trying to make their lives better through the use of that technology, right? It's a long tail of people, it's not a long tail of software. Fourth thing we need to do as an industry, and this is especially for the mobile world, is we need to build self-protecting applications, right? So obviously Android is a hugely successful mobile platform, and that's been a really good thing for the world. The idea that you could build affordable smartphones, and the openness of Android has led to a huge amount of innovation where people are able to adapt their operating system to their local environment and to do all kinds of cool things. I think that's great. The flip side on the Android ecosystem is everybody here knows that it is massively fragmented. And if you go to Google's own site, they have the statistics on this, and it's not good, right? Like the number of people who are running the latest version of Android with all the security patches and all of the preventative anti-exploit features is actually quite small. And so as a result, we end up in a situation where we are deploying a product out to people where we can't trust the operating system that wraps around it. And so I'm starting to feel like the kind of basic assumption of most mobile application security, which is, well, the OS is not controlled by an adversary, is really our version of the old physics joke. You can make any calculation about a cow as long as you assume it's a spherical cow, right? So the perfectly patched Android device is the spherical cow of AppSec, right? You can't assume it exists. You have to assume that you're operating in an environment where a significant number of users are on platforms that can't be protected and can't be patched. And so this means we need to build, as an industry, self-defending applications. And again, not perfect protections, right? Like everything that you can do here really comes back to the DRM problem. And we know that DRM doesn't work. But what we can do is we can put up protections to keep at the margins a certain number of people safe. And it's going to be important for us to find the middle ground where we turn that knob up and down to keep folks safe in situations where the cow is not spherical. And so some of the things you could do is you can think about making sure data is encrypted at rest, right? So there's been a bunch of Android malware that loves to look in every folder and find all the unencrypted SQLite databases and then exfiltrate them, right? And so you can't make it impossible, but you can make it harder by doing encryption, using the local data protection APIs, tucking keys here and there, and perhaps keeping some keys in the cloud so that some of that data is only unencrypted in memory when somebody's actively on a site. You can think about your IPC security not just from other apps, but from the operating system itself. Think about what kind of attacks you would pull off as a bad guy if they controlled all the input and output into the app. One of the things that we've done on the Facebook side is we've really focused on getting rid of the TLS bugs from the base OS. And so our Android app, the big blue app that you see, ships with the TLS library that we've built from scratch and that we statically compile into every single app. And that means that, one, we don't have the negative bugs of, when there's a certificate validation issue or some kind of SSL v3 downgrade attack or some kind of problem with the standard Android SSL libraries, but also that allows us to positively support protocols and cipher suites and things like reporting home when a certificate transparency violation happens that aren't supported by the underlying OS. And I think we're going to end up in the future, which is not good for download sizes, but is probably good for AppSec, where more and more apps are going to have more and more things replaced. For example, the lib stage fright bug would not have been as big a deal if there weren't so many apps that use stage fright to play media files, right? So if people have to include their own codecs and now control the codec, you're going to end up in a situation where there's less ways to get in for any bug that's in the core of the Android OS. The fifth thing we need to do as security people is we got to stop whining, right? There's been this trend since the Snowden revelations for a lot of people to be like, everything is horrible. There's nothing that we can build that's secure. The NSA is going to break into it anyway, right? Like, and this drives me insane. And a number of people have been using the term security nihilism for this idea that things can't be perfect, therefore we shouldn't try at all. And that's driving me insane. And we got to stop it because there are real people out there that we can help who don't face the world's best financed adversaries with O-days to every single part of their platform, who we can build reasonable security protections for today. And the result of that, of building a reasonable security protection that doesn't work in every situation, that doesn't necessarily work against an NSA or another tier 1 intelligence agency adversary still keeps those people safe against the adversaries they're facing every single day, right? And that's the important thing for us to focus on. Internally, this also means that we need, as security teams, to stop saying no. And there's a belief among the entire tech world that you try not to involve the security team because all they're gonna do is point out all the things that can go wrong, and they're gonna say no to anything innovative. And the result is, like, from a corporate politics perspective, if you have that kind of team, what ends up happening is nobody wants to talk to you except when they absolutely have to, right? And so they'll engage you 2 weeks before they ship the product because there's a checklist somewhere that says engage security. They'll come to you with like, oh, by the way, we've already rented out the ballroom at a hotel to release this app. So there's no way we're gonna change the launch schedule, but you have 2 weeks to find every single bug and to fix it. And what's gonna happen in that situation? You're just gonna create a list of all of your complaints that never get addressed before shipping, and it's gonna be in a .2 release way down the road, right? You need to create a situation where people wanna come work with you, because as a security team, you don't say, oh my God, that's horrible, like why would you do that? You say, wow, that's a very interesting idea, sir, and I understand why you'd wanna do it. Here's my idea on how we can make it safer, and then perhaps even ways that you haven't thought of to get more growth or more money, more monetization, or whatever it is that part of the business wants, right? That's what we have to do as security people, is we have to engage positively, and we gotta stop saying no, and we gotta stop whining to people about how horrible things are, because it's making us kinda, you know, people don't wanna hang out with us when we're like that, right? And we can do that in this room, we can whine to each other, okay? So get it all out of your system the next 2 days, but then when you go out back to your companies, make sure that you're Mr. Positive, that you're there to help the company meet its goals, and you're gonna do so in a way that helps keep your users safe. And then the final thing that we need as an industry, we gotta focus more on, is we gotta figure out, both individually and in our teams, how we're gonna make people's lives better, right? So we can't only be in a situation where we're cleaning up other people's messes, and where somebody has an idea of something interesting to do, and we're gonna catch it and stop something bad from happening, or we're gonna respond to when something inevitably bad happens down the road. As teams and as individuals, it's really incumbent on us to start to think about, what can I do proactively to make something safe that's never been safe in the history of the world, right? And this is actually what kind of I love about my job now, is that I'm in a situation where we're doing all kinds of things that nobody's ever done before, and we're willing to take huge risks to do so, and it's my job to try to make sure those things happen in the safest way possible. And that it's not just cleaning up other people's messes, we're in a situation where we can actually solve some problems that people have always had that have never been fixed. So, you know, we as an industry just need to focus on our internal attitude and be happy. The world isn't going to crap. Everything's not horrible. Everything's actually pretty good, right? The world's getting better. People are getting richer. The internet is bringing wonderful things to people's lives. It's giving them communication mechanisms that they've never had. It's bringing the world closer and allowing people to work out their differences through communication. It's bringing all these economic opportunities to people who right now are living like their ancestors did 500 years ago, but their grandchildren will live in a totally different world, right? And we need to focus on the fact that overall technology is a very positive force in people's lives, and it's our job to make it just a little more positive, right? And to change and to stop going out there and just complaining and whining about how everything's horrible and everything's falling apart. So, you know, just a little personal recommendation on how we can do better in that way. So thank you very much for your time. I'm gonna have a couple minutes for questions if folks have any or comments, but I really appreciate being here, and thank you to OWASP for putting on this event. Thanks. Yeah, so there's mics up here. If you want to ask a question, you can find one of these gentlemen up front in the aisles.
Hello. You were talking about self-protecting apps.
Yeah.
But Facebook has the financial means to to implement TCL yourselves. But most of the other app owners or app developers don't have that. So what do you recommend?
So I think this is a place where open source is going to help. We need to get kind of collectively defense. So I don't have any announcements in this area, but you know, as folks come and solve these problems, we need to release these libraries. And I think we're going to end up in a world that, just like how web apps, nobody builds a web app except on somebody else's framework, right? Like only insane people start from scratch. and like I'm going to take some C, and then I'm going to write all the frameworks and all the JavaScript and everything. We use things like Python and Rails, and we use what's called Hack and React at Facebook. And I think mobile apps are going to have to go that direction, where when you sit down, you're not just going to use the default whatever iOS Xcode gives you for the default project, that you're going to be like, okay, great, I'm going to use the standard mechanism for doing data encryption. I'm going to use the standard TLS library, and I'm going to use this and that. And I think if we can move to a world where all that stuff's available, then we can make it available to developers that don't have, and you're right, the vast majority of developers don't have the skill set, because like that kind of crypto stuff especially, you have to have very specialized people writing it, and you're not going to have that at a 4-person mobile startup. So we, as a general industry, if we solve these problems, it'd be best to open source it and then push folks to go use it. There's some interesting problems here with like some of the App Store rules about what libraries use and stuff. And so I think it'll be interesting to see the interplay between whether we can make libraries more common and what that does to like getting rejected from the App Store. So we'll see. If the Xcode Ghost guys can do it, like we should be able to have a library that we give to everybody that actually makes it safer. Is there
Hi, I was here to talk a lot about how you guys are offering things for people, doing for society in undeveloped countries. But where do you put your foot down when you say, all right, if people really want to enjoy security, really want to enjoy modern communication and social media, where do you approach the people, the society, the groups that are using this and say, okay, now that we've got these great security systems and we've improved, where do you bring and say, all right, now it's a good personal responsibility for the user, the end user, to say, I need to be aware about my own security. I need to make sure that my shoes are tied and my keys are in my pocket when I leave my house, and I drive my car safely because I took the driving test properly and I'm responsible. How do you assess that when you look at your audience and using your product?
Yeah, so you're right. There is a balance here of personal responsibility and the responsibility of the tech industry to keep people safe. I'm not sure where that balance is going to end up. I just know we're way off, right? Like we require way more of people than is acceptable right now. And so we will eventually find that balance, but it's not going to be until 2025 or something. Like right now, I feel pretty comfortable just pushing that we need to make products safer by default. Like one of the things you got to think about is, imagine you've lived in a developing country in a place that you've only had like electricity and running water for the last 15, 20 years. And all of a sudden now people in your village or in your tribe, or in you're part of of kind of a poorer area of a large urban area, all of a sudden have these like touchy clicky glowing rectangles in their pocket, right? And like how alien that must feel to be exposed to the internet through this for the first time ever, and all of the metaphors you're missing of what we've grown up starting in like the BBS era, all the way to today. And so I think there's a lot more we can do about that before we hit the point of where people aren't taking enough personal responsibility. And I'll tell you when we hit it. But there's, I do agree, and there does need to be a user educational component, but that's also on us to make sure user education can't just be tucked into help pages. It's got to be when things happen in the app that you're telling people at that moment what the impact is and providing educational resources. You can't expect people to search for things like, how do I keep my account safe? One thing that we do is we periodically bug people with this, who's gone a little privacy checkup or security checkup? There's like a little dinosaur, right? He's like the privacy dinosaur. No idea who in the design department decided on that metaphor. But there's like a little dinosaur pops up and he says, hey, please check out your security. And so we proactively prompt people step by step by step. These are things you should go through to keep your account safe. Turning on our version of two-factor, that kind of stuff. So I think over here is.
Hi, Oleg. I want to whine a little bit, sorry for that. So you mentioned that it's okay to have a reasonable level of security, but sometimes when you work for a global company and want to protect its secrets, it's not only about simple attacks, it's about intelligence agencies as well, right? So, and after Snowden revelation, do you think it's even possible to do this kind of protection if you work for this kind of company?
Yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't get up in the morning.
So is it like, can you elaborate? Can you add anything to the process? Yes, that's it, and go and figure out yourself.
I think even the most well-funded and aggressive adversaries, they have bosses and they have budgets, and there are downsides for them, especially if they get detected. And so looking at every part of the attack lifecycle, like every part of the kill chain, and raising the difficulty at every single part and raising the chance of you catching the bad guy and making it likely that they have to burn like an O-Day or burn a piece of malware that they've spent millions of dollars on, I think you can win that economic battle to the point of where it doesn't become a day-to-day thing that you're dealing with those adversaries.
So it's all about money, right? That you want to invest.
I mean, it's about, they have a certain amount of resources they're willing to put to bear in certain circumstances. And you need to make sure that they're only willing to do so in situations where it's absolutely, totally critical, is how I would think of it, yeah.
Hi, I'm Rachel King with the Wall Street Journal.
Uh-oh. Okay, thanks everybody.
I'm just wondering, are you working on self-protecting apps at Facebook? Is that something you're doing?
So yeah, we continually are adding these kinds of features, and right now, the place we've had the most work on that is in TLS, and we're going to be working on other areas where we make sure our apps are safe in any kind of circumstance. Part of it is proactive things, and part of it is just not avoiding the negative things like, there are all kinds of things when you build an Android app, for example, where you can create IPC mechanisms that folks can pop in from different places, and just assuming that those things are true and then having basic frameworks that prevent your engineers from making those mistakes. So yeah, sure.
I just wanted to point out an answer to the first question, which was how do normal developers make self-defending mobile apps? And I just wanted to point out there is a company called Blue Box that creates a library that
Tell us about this company.
to do that. It makes your mobile app self-defending. So there is a library that actually you can do that. It does essentially that. So I just wanted to make sure I answer that.
Is there an 800 number they can call?
There's no 800 number. No 800 number. I just wanted to point that out because people asked.
Okay, so go find Caleb if you want to get Blue Box code. Yes, sir.
I was curious about, you spoke to the idea of the self-defending apps, the apps getting much, much larger. Obviously, most secure protocols are already heavier. And then you also presented a paradigm where you have vastly emerging companies, or vastly emerging countries, which I would assume means very young networks, very early stages, and this, that, and the other. What are you finding are the difficulties that you're having to deal with right now as far as very immature networks in either small bandwidth, high latency, drop packets, things like that, and now you're trying to almost move to what sounds kind of like a containerized model of an application.
Right.
So moving these very heavy applications with heavy communication protocols, are you having difficulties establishing that or getting them to take traction, or?
Yeah, so you're right. So there's a tension here, and there are people at Facebook who work on the security of the apps, and then there's folks who have very strong push to try to keep them thin. I think some of this is being addressed by the more modern app stores through their Delta updates, that you end up with like one big download, but if you properly handle Deltas, this is obviously why Apple has you upload like the LLVM intermediate code now, right? So that they can optimize for all the different Delta updates for all the different processor types. So I think that's gonna take care of some of it. I think you're right. There's a total tension there, and you have to be very careful to not overprotect the app and therefore make it so big that nobody can download it. The other thing, you always have to think of, and I think that's tripped up a lot of people, is encrypting everything and putting TLS on everything is not super easy in networks that are very droppy, super high latency, and so it's extremely important to test your apps in these situations, and to test them on the kind of devices that you want to handle. So we have, at Facebook, we have this thing called the Empathy Lab, that's a bunch of different devices that are the actual kind of devices our people use, and we have folks, especially the ones who focus on growth in developing markets, who actually carry those around, and for the entire day will try to do their job using a $80 Android phone that only does 2G, right? And so using the product in that way yourself, I think is important, and then making sure that you have kind of rigorous technical tests, so you can make sure that all the optimizations that you should put in, like session stapling, and should you do cha-cha versus AES and all that kind of stuff, that you make sure to test those things in a very high latency, high droppy network, and because you don't want to be the security team that we encrypted everything, and then somebody from your finance team says, oh, look at this graph, this is because of you. It would be very, very, very hard to when they turn off those security features, it's gonna be hard to sell them on it again, so you want to make sure to think about that. Fortunately, things like Quick and such, I think, are making it easier to use encryption in high latency networks. But we have like a dedicated team for that. I recommend everybody think about it. I'm gonna do just the two more questions if folks are standing. I gotta get going, I'm sorry. Sure.
So you spoke about the term safety as opposed to security, and as Facebook having a lot of information, you're in a position to implement safety on a physical scale, like that transcends from the IT side into the physical world based on the information, all the information you have. Is that something you look into?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. More than any other job I've ever had, our security team is thinking about the actual real world impact on things that happen to people. And we have a very close, a lot of different groups work on safety at Facebook. So we have close relationships with them, but we do things like, we are the primary sponsors of the Crimes Against Children conference in Dallas, which is a conference that existed for a long time, but we go and we talk about the ways that people do bad things that affect children and how we can prevent it as an industry. And there's a big tech presence there of folks working together. So I find it very useful to both be grounded in like the real life when you talk to those folks, like what is actually happening to people, and then to bring the technical folks who have, maybe we've solved some of these problems in a security context where those same kinds of solutions can be applied. So yeah, absolutely.
How do you balance the responsibility of doing data analytics with and the people's personal information and stuff like that with providing a larger societal benefit?
Yeah, so that's not my expertise, but you're right. There's a very interesting balance on things like there's been controversy around, sometimes people they'll post very negative things and they'll get a pop-up that says you should talk, here's like a suicide prevention hotline. And so, but there's a whole group that thinks about kind of the ethical and privacy outcomes of that stuff. So I can't really speak to it other than to say it is super complicated, and you do have to resist helping people in situations where you're being creepy. I totally agree.
Okay, so you're looking at generally rolling out infrastructure and services to a larger population base across the world, and then you kind of get this concept of, well, we can't always have an optimal security model, but find the best thing that we can. A lot of this population that doesn't have access currently are still in specific areas where they're, let's say, quite litigious, and we have to battle with compliance, and it seems like in that world, maybe good enough never really is good enough. So what kind of
I think we should do what's best for people and do what keeps the most people safe. And then we let the lawyers deal with that. I mean, the truth is like, you can't overthink the compliance and liability side. Like, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I feel like if you make decisions that you can justify as being in the best interest of your users, that the positive aspects will follow. So for example, I think it's way better that somebody can use SHA-1, RC4, SSL-v3 than nothing, right? Like, I would never use SHA-1, SSL-v3 with RC4, but that doesn't mean I want to take that choice away from folks or the ability for them to have it versus plain text. And so, obviously you have to follow the rules if it's illegal in some country, but I don't think so far we've found that to be the issue. Thanks. Okay, last question, sorry.
Coming out from Facebook to the community around anti-terrorism threat intel?
I'm sorry, so anti-bot technology.
So recently, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, you guys changed some of your anti-bot detection for scrapers and people scraping content.
Yes.
And then, of course, as of now, there's some issues being reported publicly with Facebook. Do you see intel coming from Facebook to the community relative to that?
Okay, yeah, so if you want intel, thank you for the pitch. So yesterday we had a conference for a project that we have that's called Threat Exchange, which is an open, completely free threat sharing environment. And one of the kinds of indicators that people contribute to there are things like the signatures of bots and IP addresses of open proxies that they're seeing abuse from and such. So we have 102 companies part of Threat Exchange, something like 2 to 3 million API calls a day, over 2 million pieces of data on the Threat Exchange that were not contributed by Facebook. And so, yeah, we share when we find a malicious Android botnet, or we find abusive open proxies, or we find malware, or we have IP addresses of command and control for high-end malware, that stuff all goes to Threat Exchange. And if you're part of the group and you're in kind of the trusted groups, you'll get that information. For things like the bot stuff, that's usually what's called TLP white. And so anybody who joins Threat Exchange, right now we have 1,200 people pending applications. And so we're trying to hire up so that we can handle. But our goal is to build a free, in perpetuity, open Threat Exchange for people to share this information, because nobody wants to be locked into some vendor's threat sharing platform. I think that's a ridiculous idea. And so people can make money on our platform. So there are people that sell threat feeds. They just do a contract somewhere else, and then they click the button, and all of a sudden somebody's in their group and is able to get their feed. And so we happy to have commercial aspects to that, but we want to have something that's open forever, and the cost of Facebook is pretty much marginal compared to running the rest of the infrastructure. And so, yes, we do share that information, and you should totally put in an application at Threat Exchange. You can check out the API today if you want to see what it does. So. Thank you very much. You guys have a great couple days.